Good afternoon, Status Coup. I'm Tina Desiree Berg, and we are going to be talking about a few things today. At the start of the show, we are going to look at Neera Tanden's nomination being on the rocks, and then we are going to talk with my guest, Pat Cody, about that and a few other things, including the Democratic leadership using the parliamentarian as an excuse not to include the $15 minimum wage hike in the COVID relief bill. To start things off, though, I wanted to play some of the comments that were given by Neera during her nomination hearings this week, and we will watch that as we wait for more people to log on and join us in the stream. And don't forget to like the show so we get further up on the YouTube algorithms.
Let me begin by picking up on a point that the ranking member, Lindsey Graham, made, and that is, we understand that we are a divided nation, and on this committee there are people who have very, very different political points of view, but I think most of us understand that it's important we debate the issues and try to minimize the level of personal and vicious attacks that seem to be so prevalent all over this country today. I have a letter in front of me from, as I'm sure you have seen, a number of Republican members of the House concerned about some of the things you said as the head of CAP, but of course, your attacks were not just made against Republicans, there were vicious attacks made against progressives, people who I have worked with, me personally. So as you come before this committee to assume a very important role in the United States government, at a time when we need serious work on serious issues and not personal attacks on anybody, whether they're on the left or the right, can you reflect a little bit about some of your decisions and the personal statements that you have made in recent years?
Yes, Senator, I really appreciate that question, and I recognize that my language and my expressions on social media, caused hurt to people, and I feel badly about that, and I really regret it, and I recognize this. It's really important for me to demonstrate that I can work with others, and I look forward to taking that burden, and I apologize to people on either the left or right who are hurt by what I've said.
Okay, and as you know, it's not a question of being hurt. We're all big boys, and I don't see too many girls here, but big boys who get attacked all the time. But it's important that we make the attacks expressing our differences on policy, and that we don't need to make personal attacks no matter what view somebody may hold. So can we assume that as the director of the OMB, we're going to see a different approach if you are appointed than you have taken at CAP?
Absolutely. And I would say, social media does lead to too many personal comments, and my approach will be radically different.
Thank you. All right, let me get to another issue that concerns me very much. I happen to believe that big money interests have an undue influence over the economic and political life of our country, that too often campaign contributions are what determines policy rather than the needs of ordinary Americans. And according to the Washington Post, since 2014, the Center for American Progress has received roughly $5.5 million from Walmart, a company that pays its workers starvation wages, $900,000 from the Bank of America, $550,000 from J.P. Morgan Chase, $550,000 from Amazon, $200,000 from Wells Fargo, $800,000 from Facebook, and up to $1.4 million from Google. In other words, CAP has received money from some of the most powerful special interests in our country. How will your relationship with those very powerful special interests impact your decision-making if you are appointed to be the head of OMB?
Senator, I thank you for that question. It will have zero impact on my decision-making. I'm actually, CAP took a number of positions that disagreed vigorously with the policy positions of those institutions, but I appreciate this question, and it is my role, it will be my role to ensure that I am only serving the interests of the American people, the administration, and its agenda to address rising inequality and address the needs of working families.
Ms. Tanden, will you at this point commit to doing what President Biden and I and many others want to see happen? and that is help us move to end starvation wages in America by raising the minimum wage over a period of several years.
Absolutely.
Will you do what President Biden and I and many other members of Congress want, and that is move to make public colleges and universities tuition-free for families under $125,000 a year?
Yes, as you know, President Biden has committed to make college affordable, or truly affordable, tuition-free for middle-class families.
President Biden has stated that he would like to see the eligibility age for Medicare go from 65 down to 60. Is that something you will help him implement?
Yes, absolutely. And we know that that can actually help save money because it'll, over the long term, lower the costs per beneficiary costs of Medicare.
We pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. That is an issue I intend to take a hard look at as chairman of this committee. President Biden has indicated that he wants Medicare to negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies to lower drug prices. Is that something you will help us move forward on?
Yes.
President Biden has said that he wants to guarantee 12 weeks paid family and medical leave. Is that something you will help us move forward on?
Yes, absolutely. And I have worked for over 20 years on the issue of paid leave.
Okay. President Biden wants to provide universal pre-K education for every 3- and 4-year-old in this country and make child care more affordable for working families, an issue of enormous importance in general, especially now in the pandemic. Is that something you will help us move forward on?
Yes, absolutely. And I think over the long term, those investments help us address both racial and income inequality.
President Biden has said that he wants to triple Title I funding for public schools to make sure that lower-income kids in this country are able to get the education they need. Will you help us move forward in that direction?
Yes, absolutely.
I know this is not necessarily universally held on this committee, but I happen to believe that climate change is an existential threat to our country and the world, and that we have the opportunity to create millions of good-paying union jobs as we transform our energy system. Is that something you will help us move forward on?
Absolutely. And as you know, President Biden agrees with you that climate change is an existential threat.
Lastly, I think where there is an area of agreement, and Lindsay and I have chatted how we can work together, I don't think anybody on your side denies that our infrastructure is crumbling, that we can create millions of good jobs, rebuilding our roads and bridges, wastewater systems and water systems, etc. Will you help us go forward creating the jobs, rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure?
Yes, absolutely. And I hope we can work in a bipartisan manner on infrastructure.
This history of soliciting tens of millions of dollars from the biggest and most powerful corporations on the planet.
Senator, the role of OMB is to serve the public, and I am 100% committed to that role. And let me say that, just to be clear, I believe that the Center for American Progress took funding from the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation, not Mark Zuckerberg directly, but I completely take the point about concerns about funding. And I can commit to you that I will always uphold the highest ethical standards. I will work with career folks at OMB to make sure I do so, but I will also say that no policy or position I have taken has been determined by the financial interests of any single person.
$665,000, I think, from the personal foundation of Mr. Zuckerberg. Millions of dollars from Wall Street financiers, big banks, foreign governments, Silicon Valley, $1 million from the managing partner at Bain Capital, $2.5 million from the UAE. That was between 2016 and 2018. Given this record, how can you assure us that you'll work to see that these Silicon Valley and Wall Street firms don't exercise undue influence, frankly, influence that they've already got in the making of government policy and the control of our economy? I mean, how can you assure us that you're going to be an independent actor when you've been so close to them to have raised so much money over all these years?
I really appreciate that question. And I would say I and the Center for American Progress aggressively take on the role of Facebook and tech companies, have called for higher taxes on companies, regulations of Wall Street, financial transaction tax. I'm proud of the record of the Center for American Progress, and policies that will limit the power of Wall Street, limit the power of tech companies. I would welcome the opportunity to talk with you and work with you on those ideas, because I do agree with you that corporate special interests have too much power in our discourse. And so whether it's a financial transaction tax or other proposals, obviously I take on my role as OMB director would be one in which I follow the tax policy of the president. But it is my orientation that we need to rebalance power in our economy. And I hope there are ways you and I could work together in those arenas.
Good. I'll hold you to that. Thank you.
Over the last few years, it's been part of my role to be an impassioned advocate. I know there have been some concerns about some of my past language in social media, and I regret that language and take responsibility for it. I understand that the role of OMB director calls for bipartisan action as well as nonpartisan adherence to facts and evidence. OMB will play a vital role in addressing many of the biggest challenges we face, from beating back the virus to delivering aid that will help ensure a strong economic recovery for all families, ensuring we build back better than before. I am privileged to serve as the director. I would ensure that OMB uses every tool at its disposal to efficiently and effectively deliver for working Americans, small businesses, and struggling communities. I would vigorously enforce my ironclad belief that our government should serve all Americans, regardless of party, in every corner of the country. I would ensure that our budgets reflect the values of a nation built on hard work, human dignity, common purpose, and boundless possibility. And I would work in good faith with all members of this committee to tackle the challenges Americans are facing, to address duplication or ineffective programs, to be responsive to you and your staff's inquiries, and to assist the committee in its important oversight role. I've spent the past 20 years at the forefront of some of our country's most important policy debates. And for the past decade, I've led a major think tank that engages many areas that OMB handles every day, from budget plans to regulatory proposals to efforts to make government more effective. I would also say that in previous times, I've worked across the aisle on issues like support of the transatlantic relationship, immigration, support for small businesses, worked even in the last few years with institutions like AEI and Cato on these important issues. And so I know it's on me to demonstrate to this committee and to Republican members and Democratic members I can work with anyone.
Can you imagine bragging about working with AEI and Cato on anything being a good thing? Well, you just heard Neera say that. So I wanted to start today's show off and show about Neera Tanden and why her nomination is on the rocks this week. So 2 committee hearings were postponed on Wednesday. Those 2 committees are the Budget Committee and also the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee. Now, we know for a fact that there are senators that have publicly come out and say that they weren't going to support her nomination, but I can guarantee that behind the scenes, there's also not enough support there. Otherwise, they would have had these hearings on Wednesday. So Dem Senator Gary Peters of Michigan, who is the chair of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs, said that he thinks that all the Democrats on his committee would support her nomination. I'm not sure that that's true, but that is what Dan is saying. We do know that Joe Manchin has come out and said that he will not support her nomination. We also know that Mitt Romney and Susan Collins have said that they won't. And these 2 are important because they are usually crossover votes. Sometimes these 2 Republicans can join with Democrats and support nominations if they think they're the right person. Well, they've said that they're not going to do that. Kristen Sinema, who is a conservative Democrat from Arizona, has not said how she will vote either way, but she sits on the committee. So what is Neera doing today? Neera is off to see Lisa Murkowski, and this matters. Why does this matter? Lisa does not sit on either of these committees, but she is influential, and she is also considered to be often a crossover vote, and she's a Republican. So the fact that Neera is off to see Lisa today tells me that this is a last-ditch effort to try to save her nomination because the votes absolutely are not there. So in order for that to happen, if she gets Lisa to agree, Lisa might then turn around and get other Republicans to agree. And right now that's important because we have, about 50-50 Senate. You have Kamala Harris that can break a tie, and you have Bernie Sanders that's an independent, but he caucuses with the Democrats. So we're more or less on par here. So she is going to need, with the defection of Joe Manchin and who knows who else, she's going to need some Republican senators to vote for her nomination. In order to talk more about this and some of the things that she said during her committee hearing, which were absolutely atrocious given her record, I'm going to ask everybody to welcome Pat Cody, who is with me here today. Welcome, Pat.
Great to be here, Tina.
Thank you. So Pat Cody, many of you, he's an activist. Many of you know him as Pat the Burner. He has really solid and good opinions on where the Democratic Party messes up. So we're going to start the show talking about Neera, and then we are going to pivot to talking about the gaslighting that's coming from the Democratic leadership this week, also in regards to the $15 minimum wage hike. Welcome, 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 and let's talk about Neera. So one of the last things she said was she was sort of bragging about working with AEI and Cato Institute. Why does this matter? These are not organizations that anybody in this realm of bipartisan, let's do sensible legislation, would want to work with. AEI is a neoconservative think tank. They were more or less the architect of the Iraq War behind George W. Bush. They are also the seat of Charles Murray, who is the author of The Bell Curve. If you don't know about this book, it's this horrendous book of scientific racism in which he argues that IQ is connected to race, you're hardwired for intelligence or not, and that we should stop funding programs like Head Start because it's absolutely hopeless. I mean, if those are the positions that you agree with, then perhaps having some sort of union with AEI makes sense to you. But Neera claims to not be for these things. And in fact, she hosted a partnership event with AEI on racial discrimination. So, Pat, what are your thoughts on AEI and Neera Tanden's relationship with them?
I mean, to me, it's a perfect fit for her, to be honest. I mean, if you look at what Center for American Progress does, which, you know, for those who don't know, Neera is the CEO of Center for American Progress, CAP. You know, they represent everything we've fought against in the Democratic Party. I mean, she is the queen of neoliberalism. So Center for American Progress, you know, they're basically a think tank / lobbyist group. You know, they write legislation that's really designed to crush progressive policy. So I see the AIE reach out as just another way to stop progressives. It's an effort being placed to promote anything that's not progressive. So for example, you know, CAP, they were huge advocates for Medicare extra for all instead of Medicare for all.
Right.
So that's what they do, is they try to undermine progressive policy, and they're funded by, you know, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, PG&E, the UAE. They've been funded by a foreign government.
That's right.
And they're out writing policy for the Democratic Party.
And in fact, it did come out to light in around 2012, I want to say maybe 2011. Ken Silverstein did this massive expose on CAP and their corporate donors. She had a program called the Business Alliance, and inside the Business Alliance, you were rewarded if you gave CAP more money. You were rewarded with access to policymakers, access to Congress folks, and more placement in media relations, more placement with reports that were written. So I would say without equivocation that think tanks are absolutely one prong of the lobbyist fork. That is what they are there for. It's lobbying, but it's designed to look at something else. It's designed to look like it's more academic, more neutral, but at the end of the day, it is a form of lobbying. You mentioned that she was for something called Medicare Advantage, which is the insurance industry's answer to Medicare for All. I want to play something for the audience and for you.
I would say
so
that,
she has also been connected to the Cato Institute. And if you don't know who the Cato Institute is, that was the other one that she mentioned in her hearing that she partnered with. Cato was started by Charles Koch. This was Charles Koch starting a think tank back in the 70s. They have funded the Cato Institute with millions of dollars. Obviously, he's a massive libertarian, doesn't care anything about workers' rights. He's all about the free market being the moral arbiter for everything. If you can say free market, I use scare quotes because it's not really free, is it? It's a market that's rigged towards the donors and towards the capitalists. But she did a co-sponsored thing with Cato on this very thing that you're talking about. She sponsored with them to talk about why a mandate was important, and everything is framed within the insurance industry and having access to insurance. The idea of having, and she even refers to universal health care as an insurance thing, right? So I want to play a little bit of this clip so people have an idea of what we're talking about here.
And I would say that, the thing is, once the federal government decided to come in and say that when you are sick, you have a right to health care, they basically created a system where once people go to the emergency room and use health care, other people who have health insurance pay for that. Now, currently, both people in the private sector pay for that, as well as people pay for that through their taxpayer dollars when their hospitals are reimbursed from the federal government. But that system of cost shifting, right now, if you choose not to get, you make purchases in other markets, it doesn't really affect me ultimately. I mean, it doesn't directly affect me. I don't end up paying for your health care, but for your purchasing decisions. That what differentiates healthcare from other arenas is the fact that the federal government has chosen to regulate it in such a model, and that in these instances we have established a right of healthcare actually, and that does create a different kind of role that differentiates it from other arenas.
So here she is talking with Koch brothers funded think tank Cato about where they share policy ideas. I think it also is important to mention in an odd way that Cato actually, the Koch brothers actually had invested in this survey that basically showed that Medicare for All would save money and it was economically more efficient. So when at one end of the spectrum they're saying yes, it's economically more efficient, but it's not what our corporate donors want. So they try to sort of bury that report, but it did get out there, so people saw it.
Yeah, I believe that was the Mercatus study that was designed to prove that Medicare for All was bad and actually showed that it saves lots of money while giving everybody coverage and no copays, adding dental, etc.
So one of the things that she mentioned during her nomination hearing was that Biden wants to support lowering the age of Medicare by 5 years, right, to the age of 60. I think it's important to mention that is a step further from what Hillary Clinton wanted. She actually talked about at one point lowering it to the age of 55. So now we've gone back up to 60. Where do you think that's going to land? Is she just giving us lip service, or do you think she actually supports that?
Well, what she supports is almost irrelevant. I mean, what Neera's job is to create public opinion around what's doable and not doable. So by her pushing only being able to drop it 5 years, it kind of moves everybody back to the middle and what can and can't be done. I mean, if you look at it, Neera was one of the main architects of writing the Affordable Care Act, which was basically just copying and pasting Obamacare, which Romney Care.
Romney Care.
Yeah, so she's positioning herself to make this fight against Medicare for All, which is one of the key things that centrists want to stop in the next 4 years.
Indeed. One of the things that everybody brought up on both the right and the left, I mean, I chose the clips I chose because I wanted people to see that the folks that are attacking Neera come across the board. This isn't just progressives or right-wingers attacking Neera. It's a group that goes across the board, right? So she's going to see Lisa Murkowski today to make her case to Lisa. But it turns out that, they've all attacked this idea that Neera's been very toxic on Twitter, that she's had personal attacks going on with everybody. There's the famous clip now where Kennedy said, "You've called Bernie everything but an ignorant slut," which is pretty much close to truth. But I found a tweet that Neera had not deleted, and I think it's important to mention. Neera went on a deleting tweet binge where it turns out she deleted over 1,000 tweets to try to hide all that stuff, right, when it started to become a problem for her. But there was a tweet where she attacked Lisa that's still up that she hadn't deleted yet, and it's this very strange tweet about you must be drinking your own supply or sucking your own supply, which we're going to show so people can see this. This is still up. So in a roundabout way, she has to go plead her case to someone who she has also attacked that might or might not be aware of this. But it does it does speak to the person that she is, right? So do you think...
I believe a reporter just showed that tweet to her.
Oh, okay. So while I've been preparing today, all right, well, there you go. So my question, though, for you, Pat, is do you think Lisa is going to lend her an ear? Do you think Lisa cares about anything she has to say? What do you think is going to happen today?
I mean, my instincts tell me that her nomination is already dead in the water. They've tried really hard to gaslight the public that this whole issue is about the tweets. So meeting with Murkowski to discuss the tweets is kind of the closing argument that this was all based on sexism because we didn't hold Trump to the same standard instead of really progressives are against her for policy, as always.
That's right. You know, and I would add to that as a woman, it's really offensive to me when I see all of these men going on about sexism. And most of the time, they're basically saying a woman can't handle tough criticism or she can't have a comeback for tough criticism, that they have to be treated with kid gloves. And I don't think they realize that I find that to be very sexist, actually. I should be held to the same standard as every man is. So I think you're right. This is gaslighting. This is absolutely gaslighting. I don't think anybody is attacking her because she's a woman. They're attacking her because of what she's done at CAP. And what she's done at CAP is absolutely been handouts to the corporations that have funded her. I don't think that's up for debate, no matter what she says. I want to talk about something that came out in WikiLeaks because I think it's a good transition to the next thing I want to talk about. So Neera was caught out in the Podesta dump saying that she did not support a $15 minimum wage hike. Now, granted, this was a few years back. She might have shifted her opinion on this, but she made it quite clear that she didn't support it then and that she was advising Clinton to also not support it. Why would she? And as far as I'm concerned, this is absolutely the horse left the barn. $15 isn't even going to do it now. Even if we make this $15 today and it's sort of adjusted in over a few years, it's too late. I mean, minimum wage should be $22 at this point, minimum. Maybe even 30 if we want to look at having an actual living wage. So the fact that we're right now currently in this environment debating a $15 minimum wage is absolutely ludicrous. So yet here we are. What do you think? Do you think she's sincere now in saying that she's shifted on that opinion, or do you think she still is going with the $15 needs to go?
Well, this is the problem with the Democratic Party is, you know, she could say she's supporting $15 an hour now endlessly. They all can. They've figured out how to use a fall guy to kill policy, whether it's Joe Manchin or the Parliamentarian.
Right.
You know, they can pin it on one person and everybody can come out and say they're progressive and they support these policies. But if you look at CAP, which is, you know, you can't think of CAP without thinking of Neera. And you mentioned John Podesta. John Podesta is the one who founded CAP, and then she became CEO, I don't know, 15 years ago or something like that. But what do they want? I mean, what do their donors want? One of their big donors is Walmart. So what do you think Walmart supports a $15 minimum wage increase? No. No, they absolutely do not. So let's talk about this $15 an hour minimum wage debacle that happened this week. So basically, they were trying to include it in the COVID relief bill. And now they're blaming the parliamentarian for why it cannot be included. So let's talk about that for a second. So basically, she's saying that it would be a problem with the Biden amendment, meaning that they cannot pass this through budget reconciliation with a majority. So I don't think that that's true. That's my first thing. But I think the more important point is this. Parliamentarians are a tool of the leadership. A parliamentarian isn't somebody that is there to do the bidding of Robert's Rules of Order. They're not there to do the bidding of the Senate as a body per se. They are there to find ways in which to further the wants and the desires of whoever is in power, whoever is the leader at that time. That is what they do. So for them to be saying right now that this unelected, neutral person, the parliamentarian, is the one that they're going to scapegoat this on is ridiculous. I can tell you right now without equivocation, it's bullshit. Pardon my French, it is. And I can also tell you that the Biden administration probably doesn't want it as part of the bill. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing this. I don't think I'm going out on a limb on this.
And in fact, I wanted to sort of bring up an anecdotal story that I think matters. I had interviewed Jim Zogby a few years back, and he told me the story about when he was on the executive committee. The parliamentarian was always there to support whatever it was that he was saying. She would find a way to make it happen. That was just the norm. After he was removed from the executive committee, that all changed. The same parliamentarian was doing the opposite. So he asked her why, and she basically told him, Jim, you're not on the executive committee anymore. My job isn't to support you. So that is the reality. Are they gaslighting people, Pat? What's going on here?
They are 100% gaslighting people. If your excuse is that the procedures don't allow it to be included in this process, well, let's look further at the procedure. The procedure to override the parliamentarian is just Kamala Harris saying, let's override the parliamentarian. That's the entire process. It doesn't go to some panel for review. It doesn't get voted on. They don't get a council of lawyers in a room. Kamala Harris just says, let's override what the parliamentarian is saying. Right. Now, to override that, you need a majority in the Senate. So you would need 60 votes to overturn Kamala Harris saying we're overriding the parliamentarian. So the excuse is complete garbage. If Kamala Harris and Biden's administration want $15 minimum wage in the bill, it would be in the bill. And I think they might be under pressure, to get that in the bill now, because progressives are screaming about it, and they're not used to us putting a fight up against process like this. There are a lot of people very informed on process now. That's
right. And you're not wrong on that. So the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which is headed by Pramila Jayapal, she had this to say, and I'm going to read her quote. "We cannot allow the advisory opinion of an unelected parliamentarian and Republican obstructionism to stop us from delivering on our promise to voters." So I agree with the spirit of what Jayapala is saying there, but I would also add to this, is it solely Republican obstructionism? Because I don't think it is.
Well, and this is the problem with a lot of the progressive Democrats, in my opinion. And it's basically a rule within the party that you don't criticize people by name within the party. But if you want this rule to change, you have to call out that Kamala Harris specifically has the power to change this. You have to make that clear to the general public.
Yeah, I know, and I don't disagree. So, again, I like Jayapala. I think she does a lot of good work. She's been a great advocate for Medicare for all, but she also has a tendency to walk the party line. So The Hill has now reported that the White House opposes sidelining the parliamentarian. Shocking? Not shocking at all, right? Of course. And also Joe Manchin publicly opposes sidelining the parliamentarian. Also not shocking. My question to you is this: where is Bernie Sanders in all of this debate? He hasn't really spoken out on the Neera Tanden nomination. He hasn't given his opinion. I wonder if Bernie is key to why she doesn't have the votes to be confirmed. And I'm also wondering where he's at as far as this parliamentarian situation is. He's been kind of silent on both things. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the latest news with him is that he's pushing for a penalty to be included. So they're trying to side skirt
the tax penalty.
The $15, the tax. So
yeah.
they're looking at a corporate tax on large businesses and big corporations, not small businesses, but large businesses such as Walmart that aren't paying a $15 minimum wage will have tax penalties. So that's his way right now of going around it, which is telling us that he's not making this fight on the parliamentarian issue.
Yeah, why do you think that is? I mean, to me, this would be the one hill that he should be willing to die on. This is, this was part of his key policy that he brought to the table in 2016, and here we are in 2020. It should have happened in 2016. Happening in 2020 it's not going to be good enough. Even now, $15 isn't good enough. It's not going to be enough. So as far as I'm concerned, this is a hill that Bernie should be dying on. Why is he not dying on this hill?
I agree with you. I think there are some reasons that the Democrats are going to use that they might still have a shot at getting in even over this. So the unemployment benefits expire in 2 weeks. So we have 2 weeks to pass this bill. And so essentially they can even use Neera's nomination to hold this up and say, at some point, we delayed this long enough and the vote is a week before the unemployment benefits need to be approved. Bernie, if you're not supporting Neera on this, you're not going to get people unemployment benefits because we need this person in place. Now, granted, they can have an acting person anytime
Right.
they want, but they gaslight constantly, and that's what they'll do.
Yeah, every time I feel like the Democratic Party is sort of changing its ways, something happens that convinces me that that's not the case. I do think progressives have made inroads in the party the last few years. I just don't think that those inroads are far enough, whereas to have actual effective change happening here. It is clear that the Democratic Party leadership is still trying to serve two masters, the two masters being the working class in America and their corporate donors. And obviously these two different groups are at loggerheads. You cannot please both of them at the same time. So at this point, Schumer is looking, and he says he's exploring this idea of the tax penalty. And let's talk about that a second. So basically this would be a tax penalty for larger corporations that are not paying a $15 minimum wage. And it's going to be coupled with tax relief to small businesses that increase wages to a 15 or higher wage. So, I mean, there are some good things that could come from that. It may be better than what we have now. But the first thing I think of that worries me is, will this sort of a structure encourage more outsourcing of jobs, low-wage jobs to other countries? I think that's a real possibility. Right. And it obviously doesn't stand in for just flat out increasing the minimum wage. It's not a suitable substitutive thing to do, in my opinion. It's not good enough.
Well, and we're already seeing the argument that they don't have time to get that legislation written in an adequate form into this bill.
And you're talking about the COVID relief bill.
Into the COVID relief bill. And that's probably accurate, because if you don't check this legislation they write, they're going to write loopholes in to actually benefit the corporations from this instead of helping people.
So where are we headed now as far as a progressive movement, in your opinion, Pat? You have these two examples this week that are, setbacks in some ways for the progressive movement. I mean, we'll see on Neera come Monday whether or not she still stands. She could be replaced with somebody that is equally as bad or worse. But I think it's a real blow to the movement that we're only seeing this tax idea supplant the $15 minimum wage. And I would also add to that the idea that the $1,400 check is where we're going to end up with when Biden promised a $2K check. Obviously, this is not going to do it. Even $2,000 wouldn't be enough at this point to change the income inequality that we're facing.
Yeah, and that's one of the issues I have with a lot of the progressives now, the squad, whatever you want to say. Look, it's great that they're all out there publicly calling for monthly recurring checks. But the way the budget reconciliation process works, you have two chances for budget reconciliation bills this year. One of them has to be this COVID bill. The next one is already reserved for infrastructure and jobs, meaning you're not going to get a monthly recurring check included in that bill, meaning the only chance we have in hell of that happening is this bill right now, unless we kill the filibuster. But tweeting about this stuff is great. We all are happy to see Rokana out there saying we need monthly checks. I mean, for fuck's sake, Kamala Harris, as a candidate, said we needed $2,000 monthly recurring checks. And that was at the dawn of COVID. A year later, you're not for as much relief as you suggested we needed before the full scope of this pandemic hit. Mm-hmm. It's absurd. But to answer your question, I'd like to see progressives in Congress and the Senate leverage their vote a little more. That's where they need to go next. They need to take some cues from the Tea Party.
Right.
Leverage their vote. You can't argue on one hand that Joe Manchin has the singular sole power to kill all Democratic ideas and not say that the squad has some power to do the same thing.
Right. So let's talk about the squad then. And also, everybody, don't forget to like the video because it changes the YouTube algorithm. We need to get that, propped up. So like the video, share the video, do some super chats. Jordan hasn't been live very often this week because he's working on his really important expose on Flint. So make sure you guys do what you can there. But let's talk about that for a second. The squad, and you're including Ro Khanna in this. My thing at this point is I think progressives are coming from this place where talk is cheap, we need action. And they see talk, but they're not seeing a lot of action. And I think the force the vote situation kind of pushed that to the forefront of the conversation, right? Because people are fed up with just the talk. And when they came out and said that they're not going to do the floor vote on Medicare for all, that sort of was like, that's the action we needed to see. We're not saying that we know that Medicare for all will pass if you do it. That's not the point. The point is we have to move forward in some capacity and do something. Why do you think that is? Is it out of fear? Or is it really the case that we don't have the support, so why bother? Or do they actually not support these causes and are just giving lip service to progressives? What are your thoughts?
I don't want to say that it's lip service. I think it is a difference in part in strategy and function of what their role is in Congress, how they perceive their power. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think as activists, we see their power as bringing more centrists over to more of the public over to their positions on a lot of these issues. And we see that progressive legislation is stalled, not necessarily because of how the public feels, but how a lot of their co-workers that are centrists feel. And without naming them and calling out the processes behind the scenes that stop this legislation, they're doing us a disservice. And without voting as a bloc, I mean, they can hold up any legislation in Congress they want. And people, when you compare them, when you say, hey, you guys should be acting like the Tea Party did, the gaslighting you get from that as well. They're the Koch brothers put billions of dollars behind all these Tea Party ideas and whatnot. Well, sure, but a lot of that was to make things that weren't popular, like poisoning the environment and things like that. But the issues that the squad and progressives are fighting for, or hopefully fighting for, are already extremely popular. So I don't believe that excuse for a second.
Right. No, I think you're right there. I think the real issue here is a different one. I think it's a divide that's not necessarily this, but more like this. Meaning that you have the plutonymy that's in control. They're the wealthy elites. They have purchased all the Congress, for the most part, with donations. Right. And then you have everybody else. So, and that includes people on the right and people on the left. I think actually what's really interesting about a lot of the sort of wacky right-wing movements that are happening right now, if you actually read a lot of what they're saying on Telegram and in Parler, they're pinpointing the same economic problems that progressives and the left are. It's just that their solutions are just terrible and racist and fascist and all of these things. But they are able to see the problem, which is why I think it's an imperative that we address income inequality in the country if we want to stop having a more fascist president next time around, somebody that's more competent than Trump is, right? I mean, what about having like a Tom Cotton come into play? This is something that is a viable thing in this environment. I think the Democrats are already walking away from the midterm elections with what they're doing because they're not giving a left exit to the income inequality, and what we need is a left exit. So when you say centrist, to me, what I hear is not necessarily this sort of common sense bipartisan stuff that most people think of. What I hear is it's the plutonymy versus everywhere else, because the centrists are really doing the bidding of those folks, right? And not the working class in the country or their constituents.
Yeah, I mean, I when I have a choice and think about it, I prefer to call them corporate Dems.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Instead of centrists, really.
That makes sense.
And though when you take that argument and you're talking about actual voters and people, those are centrists, but they don't realize that they're supporting the corporate Dems.
Well, that's right. And I think that's, we can get into a conversation about why that is. Media is part of the problem, but that is the reality. I mean, if you're still waiting for the trickle down to come on whether you're a Reagan Democrat or an actual Republican, I've got news for you. It's not coming. Yet here we are all these years later, and people still buy into this nonsense, or the idea that job creators, right? These are so important. We must protect this class because they're the ones that create jobs for us. None of this is true. It was all sold to us by think tanks think tanks and lobbyists on both the right and the left, right? They just changed the messaging to suit their audience. But they serve the same group in the plutonomy, right? It transcends both parties. It's not one or the other. And that's what we're dealing with right now. So I think part and parcel to that, though, is more Americans are awake or awoken in the sense where they see that as being the problem. And they don't like the fact that real solutions aren't being presented to them. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at, if you turn on CNN and MSNBC for the last 10 years, you've seen nothing positive about Medicare for all. Nothing. Well, not one drop of positively, this is a good program, we need this, whatever. And yet it's got huge popularity across the entire U.S.
That's
even
right.
with
a
the
plurality of voters support it at this point.
Yeah, a majority of Republicans even support it. And how is that? I mean, if you're watching TV, mainstream TV all the time, you wouldn't have that opinion. So clearly the efforts of people on Twitter, Facebook, independent media, the candidates themselves bringing these issues to the forefront, we have made a dent in the collective unconscious, or whatever you want to call it, about how people think about these issues.
So there's obviously a disconnect there. I think the anger from the voting population is going to increase. I don't know that what happened on January 6th is necessarily an isolated event. I think we're going to see more civil unrest unless these things are addressed. And my real worry is we're going to see more fascism rise in the country, because fascism always increases in moments of income inequality. Speaking of, people see California, the state of California, as being this incredibly progressive state. It's left-leaning, it's run by Democrats. But the reality is a lot of the Democratic Party in the state of California is quite conservative. They might as well be members of the GOP, as far as I'm concerned. And we also had a lot of corporate money in our government, whether it's real estate developer money or fracking money would be a good topic for another day. I want to talk a little bit about the Recall Gavin Newsom campaign that is starting to make headlines across the country. It's something we've known about here in California for a while. But the reason it's starting to make headlines is they've now secured all the necessary signatures for this to possibly be on the ballot. Their March 17th deadline is when they have to have those signatures in. I'm sure there'll be a process where they have to verify the signatures and some will get thrown out. So my thought is they're probably going to continue to gather these signatures as a backup, just in case some of these get thrown out. They want to make sure they actually do have the number needed to put this on the ballot. But this movement was started by a staunch Trump supporter, a gentleman who has been having anti-mask rallies now that Trump is not on their radar per se as far as getting him reelected. They've now sort of switched gears. And they had a rally here in Ventura, which is a little bit further north of LA and south of San Francisco. They had a rally there was anti-mask, it was anti-vaccine. They had a lot of the 1776 patriot groups there. But one of the things that they were focusing on was getting more signatures for the Recall Gavin Newsom campaign. And in fact, the founder was there speaking. I'm going to play a little clip of the speech. The sound isn't very good because they did not have a good sound system there that day. And it was incredibly windy because it was at the beach. So apologies for the audio on this. I tried my best with my mic, but just wasn't the right environment. But listen to a little bit about what he has to say, and we're going to talk about it.
This is the man who started the recall. This guy.
Do you feel it, Ventura? I mean, do you really feel what's happening right now in California? And when I say today is a moment of joy, can you guys hear me? Do I get enough sound out there? I want you to understand something. This has been quite a week, quite a month, quite a year. And by the way, I want to correct here. It's not me that started the drive to recall Gavin Newsom. Orrin Heatley's here today. Say hi, Orrin. I'm going to out him. Dan's right out there today. We are three people, which out of small things, big things come. And this is big. And this, by the way, isn't about taking down a governor. This is about bringing up the people of California. Understand that. It's about us. It's about what we're doing to take our state back. It confuses is a political regime. No, it's really funny. We are at, ready? 1.7 million signatures. 1.7. Now, you know what's interesting? In the last week, in the last month, people come up to me. Politics, right? And we're all new in politics. We're not political ventures. It's supposed to be a grumpy business, isn't it? Right? It's a mudslinging business. Everybody that comes up to me with a smile on their face. Now, how many things do you do in your life that's removing an elected governor from office where people have a smile? I want you to think about that. I want you to think about how much joy you're bringing California by recalling the governor. Isn't that interesting? And I also want you, how many out here have worked booths before in other conventions, right? Here to me, what struck me just yesterday and the day before, the most amazing thing, how much joy we're getting on just the process of recalling the governor. Where else have you been able to go in small groups and talk about your state, your rights, who you are? I'm continually amazed, not by what's happening here, with how the people of California have opened up the discussion about their state. It's all of you out there doing something about it. It's all of you out there having the conversation. And that's what I've been preaching day after day, month after month, week after week, every moment for the last year and a half, is how much we are discussing our own state. More importantly, what we can do about it. All right? This isn't just a talking head on TV. This isn't just film cameras out there. This is actually all of us actually taking a stand with action by going to recallgavin2020.com. Now think about this. We need about another 300,000 signatures. You got that? There's a verification rate. It's a simple objective, but it's a complicated process. And for all the cameras out there, you need to understand this. We announced a signature count, and immediately reporters, they rush to the little secretary website like it's a scoreboard in a ball game and go, oh, there's 1 million. Where's the others? What's happening? It's a complicated process with a simple objective. We have 3.5 weeks left. Got it?
Got it.
We cannot stop now. We need to print, sign, mail, donate if you can, and participate by going out there and making sure that we, the people, have a choice and not the politicians.
Okay. Apologies on the terrible sound. Honestly, you can tell where it gets worse there. Their entire sound system kept going completely out. So they were just talking into mics. The mics weren't working. That wasn't coming out of the speakers. It was crazy. Only to be expected from these Trump folks, right? I want to take a moment also to thank the folks that have given us super chats. Thank you, Robin Bennett. Thank you, Old Gringo. Thinking of you, Jen Dyes. Thank you, Lana Dell. Taxpayer dollars fail. No one's federal tax dollars fund the federal government. Learn MMT. Indeed. Also, another one. Hi, Pat. Yeah, in fact, that's the other part of the equation for another day. We should do an MMT episode. But yeah, why are we even having this discussion? I agree, Lana, I agree. Also, thank you, Trudy, for your super chat. So, guys, we appreciate that. It goes into funding our independent news because obviously we don't have corporate donors here. Okay, so that ridiculous guy who made no statements about Gavin Newsom's policies whatsoever. Like, if you listen to the entire speech, he's just ranting and raving in a nonsense way, but not really talking about what policies Gavin Newsom has put in place other than the anti-mask stuff. I think that's what set him off. That's it, right? So if you look at who funds the campaign, it's a group called Proverbs 3:9 LLC. I kid you not. So this is an LLC that's named after a Bible verse. The California Patriot Coalition and DGB Ranch, which is a kind of a Trump supporting ranch where they all congregate at. Pat, here's the thing though. All of these Trump people want Gavin Newsom gone. They don't really know why, other than that he's a Nazi that makes them wear masks. That's sort of the stuff they say.
Right. All about the mask.
It's like,
to them.
But here's the thing. This is where it could be problematic for Gavin Newsom. A lot of progressives do not support Gavin Newsom because of his actual policies, right? So we have a conversation on the right from the Trump people that are like, rant, 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 anti-mask, Nazi anti-mask, rant, rant, don't get vaccines. There was another speaker that day who actually said that the HIV virus does not cause AIDS, vaccines do, I kid you not. So this was just a giant QAnon fest. It was frightful. But let's talk about the progressive side of the conversation, because it's obvious to me that you don't get 2 million signatures in the state of California unless you're getting signatures outside of the Trump group. That has to be the case. So let's take apart.
No, you've got tons of progressives fighting against him as well. I mean, the only problem is at the end of this, will he be recalled? I mean, if he's recalled, you just have another election where he's in it again as the Democrat. So that's problematic. But
yeah,
he's been a total failure for the state. He's been just a complete fraud. I mean, progressives are upset because he keeps issuing all these fracking permits.
Yeah.
He's issued over 8,000 oil and gas permits.
That's right.
And now fracking is the #1 source of U.S. oil.
That's right.
And here he is, you know, in this alleged progressive mecca across the country in California, we're issuing tons of fracking permits. I mean, come on.
Yeah, that, I think Fracking Gavin is his new nickname. I think that's the #1 reason is the fracking permits, but there are other things that he's done as well.
The rail system? I don't know. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this state is like what, the 4th biggest economy in the world, or that number changes, but we're one of the huge.
Bounces between 4th and 6th, but it's up there.
Yeah. So you would think the north part of California can connect with the south part one of these days via rail system.
Right.
So, you know, we put billions of dollars into this rail system to get it built, and it was supposed to be from LA to San Francisco, and now it's way behind time schedule, way over budget, and it's going to be from Bakersfield to Merced, which is not LA to San Francisco. So, you know, we're mad at him for that. That's another thing.
Let me ask you this, though. I feel like Gavin Newsom is one of these Democrats that gives a lot of progressive lip service, but doesn't actually deliver on policy. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, he was pro Bernie back in the day, but at the end of the day, he's an elitist. He comes from tons of money. He's in that realm with Pelosi's and.
Let's talk about that for a second, Pat, because I think folks need to understand something about the city of San Francisco, and also that particular district that Nancy Pelosi is in. This is an incredibly wealthy area, and for that reason, it's going to be very, very tough to unseat Nancy Pelosi. She actually does respond to her constituency. Her constituency is just incredibly wealthy. There's several billionaires that live in that district. So Newsom, who is also from the Bay Area, comes from that also ultra wealthy area. So I think it's a difficult situation, because although they might have tendencies to social policy that's very progressive, i.e. I'm pro LGBTQ rights, I want to do something about racism, I want to do something about passing the ERA, having equal pay, you know, things of this nature. Right. When it comes to anything that might harm their wealthy constituency, things change. And I think we've seen this with Ro Khanna, too, who is also from the Silicon Valley area. So
they're very fiscally Republican.
Right. So the problem is this. These folks come from wealthy areas, and if they really are responding to their constituents, they're responding to these wealthy elites, right? In the meantime, or at the same time, you have areas of California where the opposite, like you're talking about Merced, Bakersfield, Fresno, San Bernardino. All of these areas are the exact opposite. They're much poorer areas, which is where you see a lot of the Trump folks that are coming out. A lot of the right-wing militia support in the state is coming from these areas, right? They're not coming from the wealthy areas. So there is severe income inequality within the state of California, and I think we have to understand how this is marked up for us to understand why the Democratic Party does have members in the state in KDEM that are so fiscally conservative. So,
yeah,
you know,
I mean, we have one of the highest levels of income inequality of all the states, somewhere top 5. And we have, if you factor in the housing costs, we have the highest poverty rate in the nation if you factor in housing costs. And that's something
Right.
people don't realize. I mean, California, highest poverty rate in the nation. And why this is important is that Democrats have had a supermajority in this state for ages, meaning
Right.
they had the governor, the House, Senate, House, Congress, every lever of power has been held by Democrats. And so where that comes into play, where people like Gavin are very disappointing, is that, like, for example, a few years ago, activists pressured all the Democrats in the state to support Medicare for All, the state version. SB, it's been a minute, 452.
You're talking about you're talking about our state
456?
Medicare for All bill?
State Medicare for All bill. So
Right,
basically,
okay.
we on our own whipped the votes. We got the people to pledge to support it. And this is the fear with Democrats, is they found a fall guy. So all these candidates all these elected officials that are Democrats can say they support the bill, but because one person, Anthony Rendon, had the power to table the bill on his own, it has gone nowhere, even though the votes are all there. So that's kind of the fear. That's where progressives say, you know what, this is kind of ridiculous. Like, if you have all this power in California, this alleged progressive place, and you can't get Medicare for All when it's written in your damn charter as a Democrat.
Right. And so here's the thing, that didn't have to end up that way. So I think the Medicare for All state bill is a really good study as to why that's the case. And I think you also have to look at the internal California Democratic Party leadership at the time. They were not for Medicare for All. They were taking money from health insurers in the state. And in fact,
The head of the DNC, I can't remember his
Eric, you're talking about Eric, or?
Yeah, what's his last name?
Can't recall right now off the top of my head, but
I can't think of it either. But 2
that's
years
how
before
terrible
this,
he was.
he was lobbying against lowering drug prices. He was working for a lobbying company, and then he becomes the head of the Democratic Party in California.
That's right.
And his pal was Anthony Rendon, the one that tabled the bill.
No, that's right. And in fact, I will recall you were there at the KDEM nominating convention, and I will never forget this. I had been up in the front filming Bernie Sanders' no middle ground speech. So because I was up there underneath the stage there, I couldn't see the side speakers that they had on both sides. So when I saw this later, I was just horrified. But after that was over, there was a ruckus inside the room, and a lot of the delegates were quite angry, and they were yelling at the leadership, and this sort of back and forth was occurring, and I just didn't know what it was about. So I came back to where the press area was, and I'm like, what happened? What'd I miss? And I was told that they had been running, wait for it, Uber and Juul ads on the side screens while Bernie was doing his no middle ground speech. And, you know, Uber is a company that's very much non-union. And in fact, they spent millions of dollars to put Prop 22 on our ballot, which gives them a carve out for workers' rights. So now they will never be a unionized workforce. And in fact, they won't even be treated as employees. Prop 22 is just a giant disaster for the state, and it will be a giant disaster for the rest of the country too. And it's shameful that this happened in the state of California, and it was voted on and supported by Democrats as well as Republicans, not just Republicans.
Yep, and there's all, you know, you can see the conflicts of interest all over the place. I mean, I'm not sure, but somebody Kamala's sister works at Twitter, I believe. I think there's an Uber connection to.
There is an Uber connection in Kamala Harris's family, the CEO of Uber, in fact.
Right, just the CEO.
Just the CEO. Again, does that mean there's a relationship there with Prop 22? And I'm not sure that that's the case. The Biden administration said Prop 22 was bad. At least they verbally came out against it. I just don't understand how it's possible that so many folks were convinced that this bill was a good thing. Part of the problem is when you logged into the app, you would see an ad saying vote yes on Prop 22. The drivers want it. I would like to believe, though, that Americans at some point are smarter than just believing that stuff. I don't know. Maybe propaganda can be much more effective than what we imagine. But believe me, this bill is going to have massive repercussions. We now have Kroger, Vons, These are grocery stores that had unionized workforces as drivers. Well, they've now let all those drivers go, and they're like handing that work out to Instacart. So now all of these unionized drivers have lost their jobs because of Prop 22. It's
Right. I mean, as a rule, when you see a lot of commercials for an issue, whichever side is showing you the most commercials, you should be against.
okay.
Because that's where all the money is.
Yeah, 100%. So I asked Eva to pull up an interview that I did with Tom Steyer, because I think this interview kind of encapsulates the mess that is in California. Now, Tom Steyer, as you know, is a very wealthy individual. He is definitely part of the plutonymy. He made his money working for fossil fuels back in the day, but now he is switched sides. He's a green guy. He's an environmentalist. But I had the opportunity to interview him when he was running for president, and I asked him specifically about some of these things. So I thought it would be interesting to play this for the audience so they could hear what a member of the plutonymy is saying about what needs to happen to make this change. Nice to see you. Last we talked at CADEM, I asked you about Prop 13 reform, and you said you unequivocally, yes, supported splitting the roles. I don't know if you remember that.
Listen, I've been supporting, having corporations and real estate people pay taxes based on the absolute value of their properties. Yeah, of course I am.
But you say, of course I am, and I don't know why you say, of course I am. Most people of your wealth don't support that. So some would consider you to be sort of a class traitor. What do you say to those folks?
Good.
Good? I love that.
I don't consider that an accusation. I consider that a compliment. I'm someone who believes that the inequity and inequality in income in the United States is profound, unjust, and un-American. I believe that the inequality in terms of wealth is even more so and even worse. That's why I'm for taking away all the tax breaks to rich people and big corporations. I'm for a wealth tax. I'm for treating investment income like earned income. And I'm for giving a 10% tax cut to everybody in the United States who makes less than $250,000.
So let's talk about this for a second. You brought up the wealth versus the income, and these are two different metrics, and I think most Americans get very confused by that. So I would say over 80% of the new wealth, not income, new wealth that was created the last couple of years has gone to the 1%. At some point, you would imagine that the 1% would realize the situation is untenable. It's not that it's solely immoral, it's untenable. If the majority of people don't have money to spend, it eventually affects the folks that can't sell their widgets, right? So when does the plutonymy wake up to that realization? It seems that you have, so I want to know what your thoughts are on that.
Don't hold your breath. What I believe is we need to have a coalition of working Americans across race, ethnic, geographic grounds to take back this country. Because I believe corporations have bought the government, and there is no limit to what they want.
That's true.
There is. So when you're saying when are they going to wake up, the answer is no, we have to wake up. We have to retake the country. We have to break the corporate stranglehold. I've been doing this. I've been fighting these corporations for 10 years. I've never lost. I want to go to D.C. and keep doing it. I want term limits of 12 years for congresspeople and senators. I want to take on the system. I'm an outsider, but so's everybody else in the United States who doesn't live inside the Beltway. We're all outsiders, and they're running, the corporations own the government, and they all think it's working fine. It isn't. I'm trying to get the outsiders like me to get back the power. And those outsiders are called the citizens of the United States.
Right, exactly. One last question, just for fun. Is there a bromance between you and Bernie Sanders?
Look, I respect Bernie for his values and what he's trying to get done. I disagree with him on a lot of things about how to get them done. But I never doubt that he's sincerely trying to do the right thing. And so I admire that and respect him for it. But I got to say, I don't always agree with Bernie.
That's fair.
Yep.
That's fair. Thanks for talking to me, Tom. Take care. Good luck today. I had to ask him about the bromance. That was actually a thing back then, guys. Somebody's asking about this being the Bellagio caucus. They actually had a caucus at the Bellagio Hotel for workers that didn't necessarily live in that area, but they could all congregate at this particular hotel on the Strip. So that's what they were calling it. Also, I want to give some shout outs for some super chats. Melissa, thank you. Trudy, most excellent discussion. Thanks, Status Coup. Thank you, Trudy. Lana, is Gavin Newsom related to Pelosi? I don't think so. They just absolutely think alike, right? Ty Andrews, don't brag that you're feeding the hungry when you are all serving is chicken shit pie. Ain't that the truth? I might have to steal chicken shit pie. So here, look, the reason I wanted to play that is here's a guy, Tom Steyer, who's saying he's a progressive and actually doing a lot of progressive work in the state for environmental causes, and he's basically saying that these guys aren't going to change. So what do we do about that? He said we have to wake them up. Well, we're trying to wake them up. We've tried just about everything to wake them up, including the ones that claim to be progressive, and they don't seem to see the problem. Pat, what's next?
Right. I mean, you and I have talked about this before. You know, some of the local, like trying to take over the California Democratic Party from within. Something we can do is run and support people for ADEMs, which are the local representatives. And the reason that matters is they get to influence the platform within the party. They get to influence who the party endorses, and those things really make a difference. And then if you get on ADEMs and you get a few more real progressives in there, and then across the state you've got all these people who have votes on endorsements and the platform. Well, once those people get elected, they get more votes. So you add their votes, because they'll get like 3 votes if you're if you hold office versus 1 if you're an ADEM person.
Right.
So that's one way we've tried. Has it worked? No, but
hey man, I got punched at an ADEM, so.
That's right. There's no reward for being a progressive ever.
No. Yeah, I was, for people that are probably going, what is she talking about now? I was actually covering one of the ADEMs. At the time I was working for Washington Babylon. And I unbeknowingly was filming actual corruption happening, and I just didn't realize it. And I'd ask, you're only supposed to vote in an ADEM if you live in that district, right? These are the assembly districts in the state of California. And the last, I'd say 10, 15 years, it's come to the point where elected officials are now trying to control those delegate positions. So they run slates, they promote these slates, and because they have access to more money, they often sweeten the pot with like free meals if you vote for our ADEM slate and a bunch of stuff that is really completely unacceptable. But in this particular ADEM, it turned out, I'll make it the longer, shorter of this. It turned out that 90 odd people had voted in this ADEM election that absolutely did not live in the district. So I was filming this. I didn't know it. This woman came out of nowhere, cold cocked me, took the camera, went running down the street. It was pretty wild. Left me with a bruised, bloody ear, but it was worth it in the end because they overturned this election. They did a new one, and it was done properly. So, and it was just a very wild experience. So, point being that the Democratic Party loves power just as much as the Republican Party does, and will do anything to hold on to that power. And part of that power stems from neoliberal elected officials that want to protect their positions, right? So, changing the ADEMs would help. And this is true of any state, right? These are party delegate positions, and they do have a lot of power over what happens internally in party politics. It's just a tough fight to get progressives into those positions. I'd say in the state we've been pretty affected. We have a few now. We have Shauna East is coming to my mind. She was fighting with the leadership a couple months ago. So we do have progressives in those positions in the state of California. We'll see how that pans out. Did you guys make any progressive way up in the Bay Area and in Sacramento, or no?
Sacramento, all the progressives won.
Oh, well,
we
there
won
you
the
go.
slate here, but
Okay.
yeah, but look, that's the internal way to gain incremental power, basically, within the Democratic Party. So every year we pick up a little bit more power in that way, but that's a fraction of what needs to be done to make the changes we want. It's not enough. So we need to look for ways outside of electoral politics. We need to, disrupt capital. That's the only way you really get their attention in the world is, find a way to boycott Walmart, boycott Amazon, hit them in the pocketbooks somehow is the only chance we have. So, Medicare for All highlights a real urgent need that everybody is going to be able to relate to needing Medicare for all. So that I think is going to be the focus of whatever the next, round of protesting is, in my opinion. So,
right. Okay, so let me
general
ask you,
strike would be the ultimate goal.
you read my mind. I was just going to ask you about a general strike. Do you think that that's what needs to be done? Because it seems to me that simple protesting isn't really working at this point. We've been protesting. I've been covering protests for all year now. Like almost every week, there's 2 or 3 protests in the city of LA, for example, and I know that's the case across the country. But it doesn't seem to be effective. Like we're just inconveniencing a few people and making them angry, but nobody's actually making actual policy changes based on that.
Right. We're inconveniencing people, and if we're in your district and we do that, it's going to be upsetting to you as a candidate. But
let me clarify, Pat. I don't mean other folks. I mean inconveniencing the politicians that should be inconvenienced. Let me clarify that.
Sorry, I took it
That's
that
all right.
way.
No, I'm glad you said that because people might
Don't make me go out and protest, Tina. I don't want to do it.
Hey, man, banging on pots outside of Nancy Pelosi's front door. I mean,
Right. But the problem with the protests is they aren't really covered and given the attention they need by mainstream media. So it doesn't,
That's true.
The fact that I have a great local event here might make the paper, maybe it'll be on the local news. But even nationwide protests, I mean, look at how little our media covered a lot of the worldwide, yellow vest movements and things like that. So they don't cover it much because they don't want to give people the idea that you can do it here. And until we have a little more power in the media, it's always going to be like that. But, a general strike is something that they couldn't avoid if we can get enough people behind it and make it happen.
Is that something that you are actively working on now? I want to talk a little bit about that now if you're working and organizing on it. And I also want to open up the chat for questions for you from people that are watching now. And hang on, I see a super chat here from Kate. Elizabeth McDonald is not elected and can be replaced or make it a standalone bill or give the business actual support to hire and increase wages. Okay, so she's talking about the parliamentarian there. That is correct. She is absolutely not an elected official. She is just an advisor, and it's ridiculous that they would use her as a scapegoat because there's no reason why this should matter at all. So,
and we had the same issue with the Republicans, and they just fired her. I don't remember if it was a female or a man, but they fired the parliamentarian. They didn't like the ruling, and they just, you're gone.
Well, I mean, and I've sat in the DNC meetings. I've sat in the KDEM meetings. I've seen how they use, parliamentarians. It's just they're used to support what the leadership wants time and time again.
Right.
And I mentioned the Jim Zogby story earlier, and I think that really kind of clarifies it once and for all for everybody. But I'm going to turn to the chat and get some questions going. But if you are, as an activist, if you're working on the general strike campaign, can you let everybody know what are the next steps on that? Is it going to happen? What are you guys doing to try to get support for that from the general population?
I'm most definitely not an expert on that.
No?
It's just one of many issues that I'm like part-time activisming on. My current.
Activisming?
I'm
Making up words here?
Yes, I am. I'm fighting right now for ranked choice voting is one thing I'm working on. Hopefully we get. There are a lot of ballot initiatives we're trying to get on board, and then form a collective with states that all agree. If you get 15 states in, we'll all do ranked choice voting, there was a collective of, I forget how many states were in it, but they were close to getting enough states in that we almost had a ranked choice voting the last election. So it's doable. It's something we could possibly get done. And that takes away a lot of the criticisms of third parties and opens up, an avenue to get away from the Democratic Party, which lesser evil voting has just gotten us here. So
no, I agree. So ranked choice voting, I think, is something. Let's talk about that for a second. That is something everybody should support. End of story. I can say without equivocation that Chesa Boudin would not be the DA in San Francisco if it was not for ranked choice voting. He would have lost that election. I think we lose a lot of good candidates. You're right, because it turns into this battle of lesser evils, which serves no one. So do you think it is viable to get ranked choice voting in the state of California? I know we have, the citywide initiative where San Francisco has passed it. LA, they're looking at doing it here. But do you think it's possible to get it done in the state of California? And then furthermore, to get it done in the country? Is that possible?
Yeah, so it's not, from what I understand, it's not very hard to get on the ballot most places. It's gathering the signatures and getting it. You can go out and pay people to canvass and get signatures on almost any issue. And you've got a lot of people that would volunteer on this kind of stuff, but the issue is really getting people to vote for it once it's on the ballot. And that's where you run into in California, for example, like with the Uber, that proposition, you just can't compete spending wise. So we need to find another way to get the message out on these issues.
No, you're right on that. Let's talk about that for a second too. So folks don't necessarily understand our direct democracy, money and politics problem that we have in California. They just always see these propositions that are on our ballot. And I've often had people like, how does that even happen? Ask me. It happens because our laws allow for anybody to put a proposition on the ballot if they get enough signatures and they meet, some criteria, right? So if you have money, this is an easy thing to do. You hire signature gatherers, you put them in front of grocery stores, you put them on college campuses, you put them wherever you want. They don't disclose who they're getting paid by. So for the example, for Prop 22, Uber and Lyft put in a pot of millions of dollars, hired people to gather signatures, and they framed it as, this is what the drivers want. The drivers don't want to be called employees. They don't want to be employees whatsoever, blah, 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 blah. So they frame the argument the way they want to, no matter whether it's nefarious or egregious. And this is how they get away with it, right? So money in politics is absolutely the root of all evil, in my opinion. But in this particular case in the state of California, because we do have direct democracy, it can be particularly painful. I think Prop 8 is another example. I think our proposition that overturned affirmative action, also very deadly. So there's been a lot of right-wing positions that have been bought and paid for in the state of California through direct democracy.
100%.
So ranked choice is the way to go. All right, so I'm not seeing any questions. I think probably we were so thorough and went into so many tangents on our conversation. So Pat, let me ask you this. What are your closing words of advice for other activists out there that are working in progressive areas? You have a very large Twitter following. You've been very successful. For folks that don't know, you ran the Peter Douche account at one time, which was quite hilarious. Famous and hilarious. And Peter has now become quite the progressive. He's sort of switched his tune quite a bit. But what is your advice to other activists that want to see change and they're just frustrated at the fact that they feel like they've been working for so long for so many things and nothing's changing? What is your advice to them?
Yeah, I think we need to connect the dots to people outside of our little circles, especially on Twitter. Twitter isn't a place where you're going to change a lot of minds. You gotta take that politics from there out into the real world. There's a lot of value in Twitter. It's the number one place that there's a counter narrative developed against the propaganda you see on TV, and so we need to take it from Twitter to the real world. Fortunately, that means a lot of your family and friends that people don't like having these discussions, but find common ground on issues that everyone can relate to. Make it about the issues. Make it about Medicare for all. Tell people that it saves money, gives them free dental, includes no copays, it's better for less. And that's something everyone can relate to. And you should also explain that Biden's big master plan on this for healthcare in the middle of a pandemic is to expand COBRA. And everyone knows what COBRA is. Everyone has an experience or a friend with experience with COBRA.
Right.
So basically it's one of the worst, most affordable insurance subsidy plans.
It's insanely expensive. Nobody can afford COBRA.
In the entire world. It's like you triple your healthcare cost. And so Biden's plan is to have the government pick up that tripled cost. Well, that's essentially just extracting wealth from everybody and giving it to the insurance companies. You can do the same thing for less with Medicare for all. It's immoral not to. And that's my main message.
I agree with you, Pat. So if folks don't follow you on Twitter, what is your Twitter handle?
I am at Pat the Burner. I'm a parody account, Nate's Liver, which
Nate's
is
Liver, that's right.
at SILE Rabbit. And I have a new parody book out, The Yas Queen Chronicles. You can get it at savageandpat.com.
Yes, the Yas Queen spelled Y-A-S?
Yeah, Yas. Oh.
Do you have show the audience your book? Do you have a copy of it handy? No? If you don't, that's okay.
There it is. So anyway, it's a parody book. Speaking of Neera Tanden, she's in the book as Neera Tantrum. So you might enjoy that.
Neera tantrum? That's good.
Neera tantrum, yeah.
That's good. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. And you know, Jordan will be back next week. He's still working on this breaking piece on Flint. It's important stuff. And we will see